thank you for having me, and apologize if anybody came last time and we had a mishap. But I appreciate. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Oh, I don't have the most powerful voice. I was sitting here in your bulletin, and I really appreciated in the bulletin here it says, we believe that knowledge is power. Oh, you have to go back up some more. Oh, see to it. Okay. Okay, we believe that knowledge is power, and the free exchange of ideas is essential to effective civic engagement. So I see this today, or like a conversation. We want to exchange information. This book was written and researched and written during the pandemic. It was very challenging because a lot of the research institutions were closed, or the access was very limited. Like the National Archives, you have to do research online or later, and still, the National Archives research is by appointment only. And some of the local libraries I used started opening up at the end, so I very much appreciate all the digitization that's been done by archivists, so we could do this book. So let me start here we have Sir Winston Churchill in his opinion of what a prisoner of war is. Yes? Okay. Okay, I need to. Sterling, maybe we need to move this stuff over. Yeah, I don't have that big of a voice. Try again. Now many people might want to ask, why were POWs in America? This is a story that is not widely known, and I have people all the time coming up to me and almost apologizing. They didn't know this. Well, I didn't know this until I was working in Fort Gordon. There was a cemetery there. That's how I got interested. Now, during World War II, of course, you have thousands of troops, enemies being captured on the battlefield. And they have to be, yeah. I didn't realize I didn't know. Sorry about it.
Down at the bottom.
Yeah, I should have.
There you go. All right.
Okay. So thousands of troops on the battlefield were being captured, and they had to be fed and accommodated in the rear. Well, this took resources from the fighting troops. And at the on the fall in North Africa, there were just thousands. It was the most the biggest mass surrender during World War II. So in 1940, even before that, 1942, the War Department ordered transfer of all POWs we had captured to come to the United States for confinement here. Plus, we have a very severe labor shortage because most of the able-bodied men are overseas fighting. And this left nobody, except there was the Women's Land Army, to harvest the crops. So the British initially asked us, because they had been in the war longer than we had. So the British initially asked the United States to take 50,000 POWs, And in the end, we ended up having over 425,000 here in the country. Now, the POWs came over here in transport ships. They were empty ships. You know, the American soldiers and troops and other branches were taken to the theaters in these ships, you know, and they came back empty. So people at the War Department thought, well, why not use those ships to bring the POWs here? So that's how they got here, on transport ships. And most of them were pretty cramped. And let me get some water. The in-processing began aboard ships. And here on this picture here, these are Italian soldiers. And so, I missed you, certain German. They're starting to complete identification cards. And the identification cards were a lot like U.S. soldiers' personnel cards. And I have found one here from a German general, what these cards actually looked like. And they wore them around, when they came off the ship, they wore them around their neck. And this is an example of them disembarking. And on over here are Italians, and these are Germans. And I got a description, because they had those steel shod boots, and the Germans were very defiant. At the beginning of the war, they were elite Africa Corps soldiers. I wanted to see if you could see the contrasting images here. Here you've got, they look pretty defiant, pretty arrogant, I think. And then here you have a drawing in the middle. I'm sorry, it's a little small. Africa Corps soldiers. That drawing was done by U.S. military personnel. And then toward the end of the war, Hitler and his people are looking for anybody to fill the ranks. So you have a 15-year-old here being interviewed by a German-American soldier. You kind of wonder what's going through the mind of that German-American soldier. And I love the thing that historians taking notes. Historians always take notes. And then the inspection begins. Military police search. POW's clothing and property. I interviewed a former POW in 1989 when he came back to Fort Gordon where I was working, and he had a sort of comical story. He was fluent about 5 languages, and he had a book, and the guard coming off the ship, the guard said, "Oh, what's this? It looks like Greek to me." And he said, "It is Greek." Let him pass. And they went through delousing, for, here's the description. Can everybody read the description? Or do I need to read it?
Read it.
Okay. We passed in front of wooden boxes where American soldiers standing with a sprayer. Front, back, bend over, front again. The liquid burns our skin, but only briefly, then it is finished. We proceed, show our name tag to some colored soldiers, and then return our clothes, which also have been confiscated. So disinfected, sorry. So, in a lot of and I'm using the terms of the period, a lot of the colored or black soldiers did this. The WACs were involved. You have the WAC interpreters and the WACs registering Italian POWs. I don't know exactly how many WACs were involved. I like to find that out. And I have the units these women were assigned to, and I haven't been able to track down those units yet. They're probably at Center of Military History, and in D.C. And this was to the camps. And an MP drawing of the POWs boarding a camp, and then the POWs riding in white-only Pullman cars. And they don't look too distressed.
No, they don't.
This is, no, do I need to read this one? Okay. We marched to the railroad station. There were immediate shouts of man, oh man, and how about that? When we followed orders to board the coaches of a waiting train. Most of us had always been transported in boxcars. These modern upholstered coaches were a pleasant surprise. And when the colored porter came through with coffee and sandwiches and politely offered them to us as though we were human beings, most of us forgot those anti-American feelings that we had accumulated. And they have descriptions of them riding the trains. They expected to see bombed out America. And they were amazed at all the cars. And they were amazed that there wasn't a bombed out America. They were surprised. And this is the boarding the train, and this is the first impression of a German getting off the plane. From a black worker, I received my first American cigarette. He laid his hand gently on my shoulder. From that moment, I knew I would meet good people in captivity too. Now the POW invasion of Virginia was a little later, because first POWs came in 41, about 42. So the POW invasion of Virginia began in mid-1943, following the Allied victories in North Africa. The POW camps in Virginia vary in size, and different historians have counted different ones. Now in our book, we have listed 41 camps. Now they're not all big camps. There were base camps on, let me get back over here, base camps on military installations. There were work details, so the ones of various sizes. Because different historians counted them differently. But I decided to put what I found in there, at least a mention, hoping that maybe with people getting interested, we'd find out more information. Because like I said, I think there's a lot more digging to be done, especially now that things are opened back up. But you couldn't, I tried to put the publisher off 2 or 3 times, and you get to the point where you can't put them off any longer. They don't care about the pandemic. Now this is a 27 camps in 1944, and this is done by John Hammond Moore, a very famous, well-known historian. So you have the over here in the first column, you have the camp, and then you have the county. And it's a base camp, a branch, and this is a very telling information, because you got the type, the manpower, and the type of work they were doing.
When it says military, does that mean that they're just being confined there and they're not doing any work?
They're working on the military installation.
Oh, okay.
Now this one you see Whitehall in this county.
What's the difference between branch and base?
I was gonna get into that,
Okay.
I probably should have maybe reversed the slide.
That's okay.
No, so here you have Whitehall, and now these were camps according to a document in the National Archives. It's a U.S. Army document of camps closing in 45. See, Whitehall is still open as of 45. And you find some of these camps were open after the war ended. Some of these POWs didn't get out of here, didn't leave to 46.
Oh.
The farmers wanted them here. And here's camp policy and management. The Geneva Convention plays a big factor here in camp policy and management. All combatants except Japan and Russia signed it. So the Geneva Convention is very long. It guarantees the humanitarian treatment of POWs. Even today, we have a Geneva Convention. It's not 1929, I think it's 1943. And from the war in Ukraine, you can tell it's not being observed. Because probably the Russians didn't sign it either.
Right.
So these federal agencies were jockeying, competing against each other, who was going to administer them. I don't think that's too hard for us to understand today, all these competing agencies. And then you had inspectors from various organizations in the State Department going to the camps and checking out the conditions, writing reports. And some of these reports are so eloquent. There was one man in particular, I mean, you'd think he was out on a holiday, exploring, but the Army managed the day-to-day operations. And some of them didn't want to be bothered. This is an example of POWs marching to a camp, and of course, most of that brought out at the beginning. That would bring out all your local people to see them marching down. And then I read toward later they got where they just more POWs. This is sort of some of the mixed reactions of POWs. We girls had to walk through an area where there were a lot of Italians. We soon learned that they were all just human beings and treated us with much respect. And then on the complete opposite, while waiting for our military bus, I bought Cokes for all the guards and POWs. The woman behind the counter went wild. She yelled and cursed, accused me of sympathy for the enemy, and damn near physically hit me. That was the first lieutenant. He was, he was just escorting them to a camp. Here's answer your question. Types of camps. There's typically three types of camps. The base camp, which was the larger one, and it was placed where there would be better chances of employing them, because most people here were interested in employing them. And then you have the smaller branch camps, like a branch, of a tree, and then you have the base camp, like a tree trunk, and then the branches. And then you have processing stations, where they just came through, just came through, and were assigned to a camp. But Virginia did have a unique mystery camp. And there's a chapter in the book about it, and because of contracting limits on number of words, I had to cut that chapter back a lot. But it's in Alexandria. I'd love to go there. This is where the Cold War was beginning, and you had the United States and Russia, toward the end of the war, were competing to get German scientists and elite, these generals, German generals. And some of the German scientists, their technology surpassed ours. Some of the submarine technology and radar surpassed ours. So we wanted to learn from them. So we got them over here. And sometimes we promised to bring their families over, whatever it took to get them here. I think later on, one of the leaders of the Air and Space Command was a former German scientist. So, yeah. Okay. And this is a German-American interrogator. Given my background, it was not easy to be in the presence of a German officer. Quite frankly, it was unpleasant, to put it mildly. I would almost feel like vomiting for the very simple reason that I had to be nice to these guys. The only question that I asked myself is, what did they do there during the war? And to what extent were they complicit? Even if they were not fully on board, I felt uncomfortable. My interaction with them was very civilized. And what they would try to do, these, like Arno Meyer, and I have a lot of information from another former interrogator. What they would try to do is, they didn't do, waterboarding or any of that. No torture. They didn't do that. What they did was try to get on the good side of a POW. Like if you like ping pong, they played ping pong. Talked about ping pong. They like chess. They played chess. They like chess. Horseback riding. Anything to kind of break down the barriers, make them feel more comfortable. So they would slip up and say something. And then you'd have that information, and a lot of the information from PO Box 1142 helped in Allied bombing campaigns. They learned a lot. And like the other one, his name is Kohl, he said they found a lot about where the targets were in the Germans were going to attack the Allies from information they found out at this camp. So it's a very, very unique, and I think a very, I think it's a very proud thing for the for Virginians that they had this camp here. And now it's run by the National Park Service. And for a long time, nobody knew about it. And then the National Park Service was trying to learn more about it, and a ranger mentioned it to a group of tourists, and this one woman said, well, I have a friend who was here in World War II, and that opened up the whole story. And the park rangers and volunteers did a whole oral history project, and there are a lot of interviews in the National Archives. And now it's open again, at least limited. I'd love to get into some of those interviews. Some of them are online. I was able to, extract some information from online. And this is the larger camp, base camp description. And you have 4 compounds, or 4 sections, and each one of these compounds had these elements in it. If they didn't have a hospital or infirmary, then they would use the post hospital. They didn't like to use the post hospital, but they could. And then, so you had 4 compounds, large, things are large, 4 compounds, and then the camp at large had a chapel, a hospital, and an outdoor recreation area. Of course, you'd have the guard towers and searchlights surrounding the camp. And these 2 images are from Camp Winchester in Winchester, Virginia. And these are typical camp designs, like the Shenandoah's Camp Lyndhurst, and I mentioned Camp Winchester. So you can see Camp Winchester are tents, and you can see the barbed wire. And over here at Camp Lyndhurst, probably a former CCC camp, because it looks what it looks like. The barracks, these are a description of one type of barracks. The barracks were just wood with tar paper over them. They had a parade ground and this is where they went in and played their soccer. It had a wooden fence around it with barbed wire and sentries on top. That was the common area. Now this barracks was in Virginia Beach, Camp Ashby, and Camp Ashby was one of the larger camps. Now in this case, Camp Patrick Henry had a more improved barracks. They had 10 barracks. See, we had 10 barracks on the camp, on the fort, on the camp, and then you had 50 people, 50 men in each barracks. And then there were other accommodations I mentioned before, tents, and then American officers were in tents. And I read in some cases, because of the Geneva Convention, sometimes the POWs would be in camps and the American personnel would be outside on the ground, because they had to enforce the Geneva Convention. Now some people said we went overboard, and there were not a lot, but there was some pushback, especially from troops overseas, when they found out how well they were being treated over here. They really got upset and lobbied legislators. And I could see that. If you had a relative over there fighting, and you find out about this, and I gave a talk at my church, and the members were saying they were so well treated. I kept saying, well, it was because of the Geneva Convention. I mean, I'm sure we have evidence that a lot of those people, POWs, the guards and the camp staff, they didn't want to be there, a lot of them. Here's one POW, Italian POW, arriving at Camp Patrick Henry. That's on a train. And then you have the news. This is the Camp Bellwood news. Camp Bellwood, as you can see, was in the Richmond area. Now, I have seen a lot of newspaper articles about the camps, but I don't know about, it's early today, a lot of people don't know, but I don't really know how well known it was known that you had a POW camp in your backyard. But in Georgia, when I was doing the book in Georgia, there was this almost comical thing about this woman came out, here she sees a guy, and he's got the khaki uniform on, and she's going crazy, get her gun out and everything, called the police, and the guy he wanted to surrender because he was lost. He wanted to get back to the camp. He knew he'd be safe there. When any woman shooting at him. And there was violence on the camps, as you would expect, Initially, the army did not separate Nazis from any Nazis because they thought all Germans were Nazis. All Italians were fascists. And this helped the Nazis to gain control of the camps in the beginning. Now, fanatical Nazis executed a reign of violence between those dates. They held midnight tribunals, kangaroo courts, condemned traitors, deserters, and some people were hammered, murdered, or driven to suicide. There was one guy here in Virginia that suicided. In Camp Perry, they was supposed to be a safe place. Looked like you had 55, what you call rabid Nazis there, and they were probably transferred to a camp in Oklahoma. There was a camp in Oklahoma where a lot of these very defiant Nazis were taken. So after a while, they tried to separate them. And the rate of violence predated Virginia's camp, thank goodness. But there was violence in some camps, like celebrating Hitler's birthday. Should we or should we not? And arguments on the Nazi salute. And this one guy at Fort Eustis, which was a big camp, he was hammered, hauled from his bunk and hammered by Nazis. And as I mentioned, the Oklahoma camp, and not all commanders really wanted to be bothered with this assignment. They'd rather been overseas. And for some reason they weren't, or they'd been over there and came back. So, and the punishment depended on the commander's compliance with Army regulations. After a while, the Army would post a sign in the camps, you know, about this violence between the two, and, you know, saying, you know, where you should go. Well, you know, how can you trust? Who would you trust? And there was a case where I read, well, the guy, this POW, went to the commander or his deputy, told him he was being threatened, and the guy compared it to Republicans and Democrats arguing. Well, the guy was killed. You know, he was murdered.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean the expression hammered?
Beaten.
Beat with a hammer.
No, maybe it could be literally hammered or just punched. You know, you're dead. Now this guy here, this is the guy I interviewed in 1989. Because I was working in Fort Gordon as a deputy command historian. I established the archives there, and I had 2 volunteers working with me, and they started telling me about this German POW they were corresponding with, because he had helped build an organ, and he wanted to get the organ back. And so I started corresponding with him, and we developed rapport over the years. And then when he came to visit Fort Gordon, he was a Benedictine monk at the time. And we had a great interview, and we had letters over the time. And this is a letter he sent me in 1988. It reads, when some of our Gestapo friends overheard him refuse repatriation to complete a Christmas program, they began planning a court-martial. One of them stopped me on the road, warning, well, don't forget you are a German soldier. He replied, I think that is over. Oh boy, he exclaimed, and continuing to describe what happened. It took about a week, and then they set up a real court-martial. One afternoon, they were all there, 6 or 7 of them. They closed the door from the inside, and then they started threatening me with taking steps against my family in Germany. They would find means to do it by way of some soldier who was going to be repatriated. They would give him the documents necessary for the police to interfere in Germany. That is the way they would do it. And so he was advised by another Benedictine monk, kind of go undercover there, be less prominent, so he had to start working in the lumber mill, you know, but you know, he's a very, very intelligent man. But you know, he didn't seem to have any antagonism toward being here. Because a lot of these people would rather be here than on the battlefield, especially the Italians. And a way to deter violence was to maintain military discipline, because of course, and that especially applied to the Germans, who were used to being in a unit with defined discipline, and the Army didn't want to break that down. The German officers didn't want to break that down, so they tried to maintain that. The word escapes, you know. 15 reported in Virginia. And then there's differences over the number of escapes according to the time you're counting them. Now the War Department account said there were small number of escapes. Can people read that, or should I read this?
Read it.
Okay. The War Department stated the small number of escapes were due to the POW. This is sort of like I just said. The POWs were part of a tightly obedient military unit in which each rank was responsible for its actions to its direct superior. 2, the POWs responded positively to the camp's recreational and education programs. And 3, they realized there was no place to go. Most of them understood their options were limited by America's borders and its vastness. There was a case in South Carolina where a guy had plans to hop a plane in Colombia. I guess he was going to fly to Germany. And then I mentioned before about the high demand for POW labor. And here you have the Geneva Convention coming in again. All physically able POWs worked except the officers who could work or not work. They were paid too. They were paid to work.
Wow.
And they weren't given the money then, but it went into a fund, and then they were repatriated. They got the money and went home. They were paid the same amount of money as an American private.
Wow.
And here's some examples of punishment with the Camp Perry's commander and then Camp Pickett's commander. They went on bread and water diets, put them on bread and water diets until they decided to work. And most of them wouldn't hold out too long. This is a breakdown of what the POWs did. Like the paid contract labor, and like one gentleman was mentioning 58% worked on army installations, and then they worked inside the camps. And the big thing, there was like farmers and lumber people, and American employers would hire them through contract labor, and the contracts were very difficult. Had to jump through all the hoops, the red tape, and here's a breakdown of the contract labor. You can see most of it's in farming. And this is an example of the job diversity. They've been helped Boy Scouts collect all newspapers. And because, a lot of these POWs, you have to remember, they were skilled workers at home. So you have in the middle, you've got a machinist in Richmond. Now, working in a fertilizer plant was more unusual. And farms here. And I think the picture over here, I like this picture over here. That tells a lot. You've got POWs farmer with 2 POWs as children. And they're all pretty much in a relaxed environment, smiling, all that stuff. And then they picked apples in the Shenandoah. You've got the guy on a tractor, and here's a guy down here with looks like turkeys. They did a lot of work in the lumberyard. And then you had work details, like at Woodrow Wilson Hospital. There was a train wreck near Charlottesville, and there were about 200 POWs on the train. They were most of the injured ones were transferred to this hospital, and and then other cases they worked around the yards as a work cleanup crews. And here in this county, you had Camp Whitehall, which a gentleman was talking to me before about Camp Whitehall. And it's near, it was a branch of a base camp, Camp Pickett. They worked in apple orchards, they worked in peach orchards here. And a nearby families supported the POW camp there. That was one of the ones I mentioned was open at least by 45, still open. As with any large group of workers, some complaints were registered. For example, charges were made that prisoners of war working in orchards in Albemarle County occasionally marked swastikas or PW on the fruit. Some employers thought it's the same thing as thumbing his nose at you, because it ruined the peach too. This is about camp life. this working in the Camp Leesburg kitchen, I got that picture at this local library. Somebody got in that camp and took that picture. It was an unauthorized picture. It wasn't an army picture. They sneaked in there. And sometimes they let the POWs make their own dishes, native dishes. And there's an example of mess hall. Now the camp canteen was a focal point. They went in there, purchased personal items. And sometimes they purchased beer. When Americans didn't have beer. They had an education program guaranteed by the Geneva Convention. And you had institutions here which offered courses. Then you have a recreation program. This is all guaranteed on the convention. An arts program, I like the middle picture with a POW painting with the guard tower and the barbed wire in the background.
Wow.
And you got a sports program. And what do you think the most popular sports was? Soccer. And they had teams. And they had a religious program. These are two examples of religious institution places. And then you have the religion versus Nazism. At first, you know, Nazism was like a secular religion. And as time went on, they began to realize that maybe Germany wasn't going to win, and they began to come more around to Christianity. Then there was a re-education program. It's kind of murky. It probably was not really authorized under the Geneva Convention. We weren't supposed to brainwash these people. But, you know, we knew they were going back to Germany. We wanted to ensure a democratic Germany, so we started teaching them democratic ideals. Like in this case, English was the most popular, and that history, government. But the POWs saw the disparity between the re-education programs, democratic ideals, and America's racially defined society. Blacks saw that the POWs were considered as whites, and they can enjoy the freedoms that whites had. Like POWs could go into a neighborhood grocery store or neighborhood store to get a Coke. A black American couldn't. And Italian service unit members stroll along Virginia Beach and yell at the women. And the soldiers didn't like that. And where a black American couldn't. And some historians see this as the beginning roots of the civil rights movement. And then at the end, this is like May of 1945, these Italian soldiers are being repatriated. And by the end of the war, 371,000 German soldiers were held, and that tells you there the number of Germans and Italians and Japanese. Every state except 5 had POWs.
Wow.
In Virginia, in 1946, you can see the population still here, because the farmers needed their help. The American soldiers coming back, or American airmen coming back, had to go through deprocessing. They were involved in all that, and the farmers and lumber people still needed their help. Lessons learned. The POW program had an economic impact in Virginia. The crops would have rotted on the ground. There was a case of a couple lobbied the governor to get a camp near them because they had visions of their apples rotting on the ground. It had a social impact in that most people thought, all, like I said before, all all Germans were Nazis, all Italians were fascists, and then they began to see them more positively. As fellow human beings wrapped up in a war, they could not prevent, just like a lot of our soldiers, they were drafted. You know, a lot of these Italian, Germans, they were drafted. They weren't all for the fatherland. They didn't all support Mussolini. So in the war in Ukraine, it's still relevant as long as there's going to be enemy combatants captured. POW policy to manage it is relevant, because you could just see what's happening in Ukraine today on both sides. You know, to learn the lessons from the past, and I think that's the importance of history. You learn the lessons of the past. You don't have to live in the past. You know, learn the lessons from the past and apply them to now in the future. And this is quotes from two people we all know very well. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? I wonder, the way we viewed German and Italian POWs, right? Whether we viewed Japanese POWs the same way.
Oh, even worse,
Yeah.
because we knew how our
They look
soldiers.
different, right?
What?
They look different than us,
Well, yeah, they look different.
right? Because the Germans and Italians probably were assimilated a lot easier.
Oh, yeah. And Japanese looked a lot different, and I think news of how our soldiers were being treated by the Japanese. You know, just whoever.
Did any of the POWs stay in the United States?
They weren't allowed to stay. They had to repatriate, but a lot of them, some of them came back after the war. Some of them had wives here, Italians especially. See, when Italy surrendered, they became, Roosevelt called them co-belligerents, which nobody exactly knew what that meant. And so they kind of still consider POWs, they had more freedoms. And like some of them take it to the orchestra, you know, and have wives here, but they couldn't take them back with them. They'd have to go back to Italy and then they come back. But they couldn't stay here.
Thank you. You mentioned the site in Alexandria, but the other sites in Virginia, are any of them still there, you know, for other uses?
Well, I know there are a number of historical markers, not nearly enough. I think it's something really could be worked on. And in Alexandria, there are still tunnels underneath. And now that the park rangers know the story, they tell the story. But in Camp Lyndhurst in the Shenandoah, a friend of mine, I'm gonna get together with him. He and another guy made a film about it. And he said, in a lot of these cases, camps, you can see the foundations still there. And he was saying, telling people not to go there because it was, you know, rattlesnake infested. But there's still foundations. Like in Charleston, where I was raised, was a chimney of the camp there. And the property owners were Jewish. It bothered them so much, they had it torn down. And unfortunately, nobody relocated it, you know. And but maybe in most cases you'll find foundations. In some cases, you might find the the CCC camp that was used as a POW camp.
And also, where is Camp Perry, or was Camp Perry?
I believe it's, I've seen the sign. It's, yeah, near Williamsburg. Yeah, it's still there, yeah.
Is your book available on Amazon?
Yes, but you can get it cheaper here today.
I have two questions, please. Did they, I saw that in some of the pictures they had, you know, fencing and so forth, but when they were out working, were there guards with guns?
One man here said an interesting story. Yes, they had a gun, but at first there was a lot of concern about skating. By the time they got to Virginia in 1943, there wasn't as much concern. So you might have one guard per bus. And then some guards would go into the local store and sit there, have a Coke while they're working. one gentleman told me here, and I've heard that story before, had a guard with a rifle, he fell asleep.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it wasn't a big concern.
Mm-mm.
And please, the other question I had is, you made the statement that the Germans, when they were brought over, were surprised that they didn't find a bombed-out America.
Yeah.
So is that just propaganda that they were given?
Yes, oh yes, oh yes, just pure propaganda.
Had no idea that,
Oh yeah, it goes both ways,
okay.
yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Where in Alexandria, where exactly in Alexandria was this mystery camp?
It's called Fort Hunt today. It's on the George Washington National Parkway. And I desperately want to go there.
Fort Hunt?
Fort Hunt.
Okay, thank you.
And then P.O. Box 1142 is the zip code there. Yes, ma'am, back here.
How many people came back after they were repatriated to marry or to live in the United States? Are there records of that?
I haven't found the records of that yet. Maybe I could dig deeper.
And the situation where the person was on the farm in Esmont, was there a guard with that
Yes.
prisoner?
There would be a guard, but it's much, I don't know if he'd be awake or not.
Did they both stay with the family? Like, that's a long way from Whitehall to Esmont.
Well, they would, when they went out to the farm, the farmers usually would go to the branch or base camp, and the farmer would have them transported. And sometimes the army transported them.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Just piece of trivia here. POW number 1 was one of the Japanese sailors on the mini sub that struck in Hawaii, and his sub had run aground, and he was taken prisoner, actually by a Japanese American
Was it by a Japanese American?
who was a soldier, of course.
Yeah, I knew that was the first one, but I didn't realize it was Japanese American.
Where were the Japanese interned?
They're in Virginia. Most of them were diplomats, and they were they stayed in hotels
Greenville.
In Virginia.
in the
But they were diplomats.
Yeah.
So what about the captured people?
Hmm?
What about captured soldiers, Japanese?
Oh,
soldiers?
I haven't run across captured soldiers. I've run across captured German diplomats. I mean, German and POW diplomats, and they were held in hotels in Shenandoah. Right now, the name of the hotel eludes me.
I think it was the Greenbrier, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was one in Greenbrier, thank you. I think there were at least 2 hotels.
Is there any research with respect to who handled POW camps and the indentured camps where Japanese and Italians were held as enemy, whatever? It seems to me from the story we hear, POW camps were under army control, somewhat disciplined. Of course, bad things happen all over because there's a lot of people. But if you read about the Japanese interned and the Italian American interned, it seems to be awful.
Yeah.
So is there any research about, like, what the government is treating these people this way, if they were combatants, and we have people here who are combatants? It seems to be so much better with the POWs, I don't know if that's true.
Well, it was better because of the Geneva Convention.
Say again?
It was better treatment under the convention.
But, yeah, the Geneva Convention protected them somewhat.
Yeah, it did protect us. I mean, there was murders. There was the guy out in, I think, Iowa. He had been drinking. He was a guard. He went up to the guard tower in the middle of the night and took a machine gun, started mowing them down.
Oh,
He was later declared to be mentally unstable.
no kidding.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, I find it a bit troubling that our POWs in Germany, in Japan,
I know.
were not treated near
I know.
the dignity that the German and Japanese prisoners were treated in the United States.
Yes.
I was just reading how they were treated.
Yes.
And they were treated terribly.
Yeah, I'm reading that. I'm broken right now. I'm broken. I'm reading that book about a chap. Yeah,
It's deeply troubling.
It's troubling, and I wanted to make sure that we recognize that, you know, and I do recognize that, and it's very troubling. It is troubling, but we were following the Geneva Convention. Now maybe we went over too far. You know, some of the commanders and guards thought we did, and some of the soldiers that I mentioned abroad and here.
We
were really,
provided 5-star accommodations for them here in the United States.
yeah, well, basically. But that, I know that doesn't, it is disturbing. I had a lot of, when I gave it this thing, a version of this to my church, a lot of church members were disturbed. And I never wanted this to come across. I never wanted my presentation or my book to come across that we didn't recognize that our soldiers, sailors, airmen were not treated as well. I maybe should have talked about that more. Perhaps I should, because it is troubling. My father was in World War II in the Pacific.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Besides strictly following the Geneva Conventions, there's also a bit of a wishful incentive. You treat them decently, maybe they'll treat your guys decently.
That was the hope.
Obviously, it doesn't work all the time, but if you don't do it, it could be much worse.
Oh, that was the hope behind it. One hope.
In the back.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'm a little confused.
Oh.
You keep saying the Geneva Convention, and that's how we treated our POWs so nicely. We treated the Nazis so nicely. So, the Nazis in Auschwitz didn't go under the Geneva Convention, where they killed
No.
millions of Jews? I don't
No, they didn't sign
No,
it.
they never signed it.
They didn't sign it. Russia and Japan did not sign it. Obviously, Germany didn't observe it.
whatever they wanted.
Yeah, they didn't observe it.
So when we had Nazis over here in our camps, were some of them involved in the POWs in their country?
Could have been, yes. Like I mentioned about Radbert Kohlhaas being pulled before a court martial. They were threatening his family in Germany. And I'm sure it happened a lot.
Last question.
The Geneva Convention protects the enemy combatants, but most of the people in Auschwitz and the other concentration camps weren't combatants. They were either parts of the countries that they claimed as theirs, so they were their own people, just
Yep.
as our Japanese Americans and German Americans in the internment camps were our people.
Yeah.
So they didn't fall under the
No.
Geneva Convention, and I think that's why our enemy combatants were under the Geneva Convention and all these other people. were not.
And it, Geneva Convention also did have protections for civilians too. Some civilians caught up in the war too.
It wasn't right, but
No.
I believe that's why they followed that so differently between the different groups
Yeah.
of people.
Well, like man was saying about the woman was saying about the Russians. I mean the Japanese. Obviously they shouldn't sign it. The Germans signed it, but obviously they didn't follow it. It is very disturbing, as the gentleman said, and I'm not trying to wash over it. I'm really not.
It's very disturbing, but I'm not sorry that we treated people well just because they didn't. You know, it's not it's that two wrongs don't make a right.
No.
We did right by the POWs. We didn't do right in our internment camps, but we did internment?
No, we didn't do right internment camps.
In general? not
We didn't
all?
do right the internment camps, and I get a little, I mean, I don't wanna cause any disturbance or controversy, but I get a little bit today with calling them, concentration camps. They weren't concentration camps. There's no comparison. No.
Thank you, Dr. Roe.
Thank you.
I believe you have some more books to sell.
Yeah, we have some more books.
If you'd like a book, come up and talk to Dr. Coker. Thank you all very much for coming out today, and please keep in mind that we can only continue doing programs like this with your support. So go to albemarlehistory.org and become a member. Thank you very much.
Thank you.